Hi, I'm Linda Augsburg, Editorial Content Chief of American Patchwork and Quilting, and in this Show Me How video, brought to you by Baby Lock and the Crescendo Machine, I'm going to show you how to make this adorable little Christmas ornament. Now, you can download the instructions for this ornament and two others at allpeoplequilt.com/showmehowornament. In this ornament, because these triangle squares are so small, we're going to make them a little larger and then trim them down. If you've never done that before, I'll show you how that works. So what you need to make the ornament are 4 2.5-inch squares, 2 in one color and 2 in the other color, a 4-inch square of fabric for the backing, and that can be anything that coordinates. If you want to use scraps for this, it's a great project for that. Also, you'll need a 4-inch square of batting, and then 4 1 1/8 by 4-inch strips for the side binding. You'll also need a piece of size 5 pearl cotton, and that needs to be about 8 inches long. Now, pearl cotton comes in a twisted skein, so if you're looking for pearl cotton, you can also use ribbon or even a thick thread, but I like the pearl cotton. It comes in so many colors. So let's get started sewing. So there's lots of ways to make triangle squares. The instructions tell you to cut these 2.5-inch squares in half diagonally, so you have small triangles that you would sew together in pairs to make your triangle squares. I like working with a little bit bigger piece of fabric than that, so instead I'm going to start with a square and do my sewing, and then I'm going to cut. So I'm going to line up my ruler. This is my 45-degree line on my ruler. I'm going to line it up with the side of my lighter fabric block on the wrong side, and I'm going to make sure I've got both corners lined up, and I'm going to mark that diagonal with a pencil. You can use another marking tool, whatever your favorite is. Then I'm going to layer my fabrics right side together. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch from the line on each side, and then I'm going to cut along that line that I drew. And what I'll end up with is 2 half square triangles. So once you've sewn and cut your 2 pairs of 2.5-inch squares, you'll end up with 4 half square triangles that'll look like this. Now I'm going to trim them down. So the first thing I'm going to do is, again, use that ruler that's got the 45-degree line on it, and I'm going to line it up, the 45, with the seam line, the diagonal seam line in the block. And I just want to trim off a little bit. Then I'm going to rotate that block, line it up again, but this time I'm going to line up both the diagonal line and this 1.5-inch line also on my ruler, so that I am trimming this to a 1.5-inch block. And I'm just going to trim again. You want to make sure you've got it good and lined up on that diagonal. And then trim. I know it seems like there's a lot of waste, but I would have a hard time piecing something that small accurately. So I find that it's worth the time and effort to trim these squares up so that they're perfect, as opposed to trying to make something that small be accurate. So now that you have all 4 of your triangle squares trimmed up to a 1.5-inch square, you're going to lay those 4 out in a pinwheel design. You're going to sew the pairs together, and then you're going to sew one row to the next. Then when your ornament front is finished, you'll layer it right side up, batting under it, and then the backing, 4-inch squares of both of those underneath, and the backing will be wrong side up, making a little quilt sandwich, just like you would with a regular quilt. You can quilt as desired. I did just an X and a plus sign along the seam lines. It's just to hold all 3 of those layers together. Now I'm going to trim the backing and the batting even with the ornament front. So again, just lining it up. And I'm using both the edges and that diagonal line again, just to be a little bit of a guide. So those binding strips that we cut at 1 1/8 inch by 4 inches, we're going to add to the opposite sides of the ornament. And you can see I added one here already. I sewed it on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to show you how to do the second one. It doesn't matter if you choose to line up these first strips even here and then sew and trim off the excess, or trim off excess from each end. It's just personal preference. You're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sewing the strip right side toward the ornament right side. Once you've attached that binding strip, you're going to bring it, fold it along that sewn edge, bring it around to the back, fold under about 1/4 inch on the edge, and then hand sew that folded edge down to the back. You're going to do the same on this side, and then you can trim that excess even with the ornament. So now I've sewn the 2 final binding strips onto the ornament. I made sure when I did that I had 1/2 inch at least at the top and bottom so that I had enough to turn over under those ends. I've then trimmed this one so you can see that's about 1/2 inch beyond both ends. I'm going to turn the ornament over. I'm going to fold in those 1/2 inch ends and just finger press them. And then I'm going to fold under, like I did for the other strips, the 1/4 inch on the long edge, and then bring it around and hand sew it again right along that seam. I'm also going to do a few hand stitches here on the end, making sure all that seam allowance and extra fabric is tucked in nice and neat. From there, just attach that 8-inch piece of pearl cotton, making sure you knot the end, make a loop, and your ornament is finished. And that's all there is to making this adorable little ornament. You can make a whole set of them to give as gifts, or you can use them as a fun little attachment to a gift tag and bow. I know that they would look great on one of those mini ornament trees or even your regular Christmas tree. So whip up a few this season. Again, if you need those instructions, they're at allpeoplequilt.com/showmehowornament. Thanks so much for joining us.